Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Of course, Norwich City back at Carrow Road this weekend. A double header at Carrow Road this week now coming as well. So it feels like quite a big week in what's a very busy December for the Canaries before we make that really. So it's a difficult trip to Portman Road next weekend, which is quickly coming around on the horizon. And with that, we're going to preview Preston first, though, and I'm going to be joined by my colleague Samuel Seaman to look ahead of this one. Sam, first and foremost, a nice and quiet week, I suppose, compared to last week with the AGM, the Watford game, the Bristol City trip. How's your week been, and how are you feeling ahead of a big game tomorrow?
Yeah, it's been pretty relaxed. It's nice to have a week without a championship game in the middle of it. Feels like without it being an international break, it's the first time that's happened in a while. So finally a sort of natural week where it feels like the right space between games. It's not an international break where I'm just wishing club football will come back, and it's not one of them where, like you said, midweek trip to Watford, AGM, quite scrambling around quite a lot. And I've been off till today, so I've been really relaxed, just sort of looking at it from afar. But I think now we all know it's probably going to be even more busy than it was last week with that Ipswich game and Sheffield Wednesday. I think only like less than 3 days before it's going to be quite a quick turnaround, and probably quite a short period for Norwich fans to ready their emotions for what could be an ecstatic day, or maybe one of the worst in recent Norwich City history. So I'm looking forward to next week in a strange way, but it was nice to just be able to sort of calm down a bit for this week and look ahead to a game which I think Norwich will go into feeling fairly confident. Listening to the press conference yesterday, Wagner sounded like he, as much as managers really can, because they never actually say obviously that a game is easy to win or that they should be going into it thinking they're favourites. But I mean, you were in the room. I presume you got the same sort of feeling that Wagner felt this was a real opportunity for Norwich to go and build on their run in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think particularly given the way that the last game transpired, the dramatic late winner from Adamida, of course, huge for the confidence of the players. 3 wins in the last 4 games. Maybe the performances haven't been overly pretty, but the results have been crucial just to kind of, I suppose, get them back on track a little bit, maybe sort of ease any fears that Norwich are free falling down the table to areas that they really shouldn't be anywhere near. I suppose a week on now, Sam, almost a week on from that dramatic win at Bristol City. I sort of mentioned it there, how big it is for the confidence, but how big was it also for David Wagner? Because, it was after a week that had kind of that defeat at Watford and the manner of that, and then the comments from the AGM, you could feel maybe the fan mood wasn't at its highest, but, you have to enjoy these moments when they come, and that Adamida moment was quite something.
Yeah, I think Wagner probably has Adamida to thank for quite a lot. He's obviously won him 4 points over the last 4 games when he absolutely desperately needed it. And to be honest, in a results-based business, as much as we've heard from Ben Napper about the plan going forward and how maybe the style of football, when we assess it compared to David Wagner's preferences, feels a bit different. It's going to be quite difficult for you as a sporting director, looking at a team that's trying to progress up the table, looking at 3 wins out of 4, and to do anything about that, in terms of firing the manager. So for David Wagner, it's been an absolutely huge run of games for him, probably more so than literally anybody else connected to the club. So I think he'll be delighted with it. I did find it interesting how in that press conference he referenced the fact that right now it's about results rather than performances. And I would think, based on how Napper has spoken generally and just the situation you'd assume from a new sporting director coming in, that maybe it's actually the opposite for him at the moment. In a sense, I feel maybe that he should be hoping for positive performances that show that he can be the man in the long term rather than the results that keep him in the job in the short term. However, you look at the fan mood and the way that things were going, that Cardiff game felt like a game where he absolutely had to get a result. And then obviously since then, it's just ease, really. You felt it turning a little bit after that Watford game and the manner of defeat there. And you can absolutely understand that. I think fans were right to be very, very upset with the way that game was lost. Then you go to Bristol, and had they gone and lost that game, you felt he almost would have been back to square one after a couple of encouraging results against Cardiff and QPR. But it was good to hear him recognise that there is room for improvement in their performances. I'd say probably against Bristol, it wasn't the worst we've seen this season. And if you had put the Bristol win and the Cardiff win into that run of positive results at the start of the season, I don't think anyone would have noticed, to be honest. The QPR one was a completely different one. That was, one of the dullest games of football I've ever watched. But looking at those games at the start and end of that run, I think there have been slightly positive signs, and Wagner will be pleased with that. But just in the short term, it was a matter of survival for him, to be honest. So, yeah, he's got Adam Eder to thank a lot for that. And you could probably see how much it meant from his celebration against Bristol. I think any late winner is always welcome, but you probably don't get that celebration unless you're in the context that Wagner and Norwich are in at the moment. So that was a huge moment for him. Probably sees him through for the next 3 or 4 weeks, especially when you consider the density of games coming up. But yeah, it will be an interesting one to follow from here, because he probably has earned a little bit of credit, maybe not with fans based on sort of the way that they're still speaking at the moment, but you probably think higher up the club he has earned a little bit more time with those results in recent weeks.
Yeah, I see lots of comments and questions flooding through. Of course, we'll make our way through those as we go through the show. Joe saying he'll be there at Carrow Road tomorrow. Jason Butcher, big game tomorrow. We have to bring the noise. Ian Gabelli is feeling very confident. 3 wins out of 3 coming up. David Wagner's Yellow Army. I can see lots of questions. We'll come around to those in just a moment. On Adam Eder, you mentioned him there a few times, Sam. Came off the bench. David Wagner, after the Bristol game, kind of referenced him as almost a super sub, and the ability that he has to change games. Most dangerous sub in the Championship, I think, is the exact words he used. Paddy asked him yesterday kind of about Adam Eder, I suppose, and maybe what he needs to do to almost make that same impact, I suppose, from the start. I mean, David Wagner feels like he has made that impact, but maybe not so much through goals and assists. So what can he do, I suppose, to maybe reach the kind of levels where he has off the bench in terms of sort of making the impact that Norwich need in terms of contributions with goals and assists?
Yeah, I'm not sure I really agreed with that assessment that he's sort of still been as effective from the start. He just hasn't got the stats to back it up. When you're looking at a striker, really, and he is a true number 9, he's rarely been played even in that number 10 position, where sort of Ashley Barnes has made his home in the last few months. He's fully played as a number 9, and I think in that position you have to base it on goals and assists, really, unless he was contributing something absolutely unbelievable in terms of movement or tactical structure, then maybe you could excuse it. But I think we can all agree he is more of your basic goal scoring striker than any sort of super intelligent player that maybe the likes of Teemu Pukki were. So I find it quite interesting that he thinks he's been effective from the start of the season. I'm not sure I'd really agree with that. Watford was the most recent example of him starting. I think he got hooked sort of midway through the second half, having made very little impact throughout the game. For me, he's a striker who comes alive in the box, who knows where the ball's going to drop, and who has a very decent finish on him, isn't likely to miss decent chances on a very regular basis. So for me, that's why he seems to work so well coming off the bench for Norwich when they probably need a goal, because that's when the balls are going to be flying into the box, when the counter-attacks are going to be happening, when the game's going to be most open, and the ball probably is going to be dropping into the box for somebody to react to. That, to me, feels like why he's been so effective off the bench. So I'm not really sure how to find the answers from the start. I suppose you could say the best way for that really to happen would be Norwich having more of the ball. You look at Teemu Pukki and the goals that he scored. He similarly came alive in the box and was a really good finisher and knew where to be. Admittedly, quite a different sort of profile to Eder, but that was the sort of goal that he scored. I think they were sort of similar types in that sense. And the reason that why he was effective from minute 1 was that Norwich were camped on the edge of the opposition box from minute 1, and the ball was falling in there all the time. He was able to find that half yard very often because Norwich were based on a system that was trying to find those balls into the box. With Adam Eder, I feel like that's much less likely to happen because Norwich want to play this style of football under Wagner, where they defend most of the time, where probably the ball isn't coming into the box that often, and he isn't likely to find those finishes on a very regular basis. I do think he has the pace and the athleticism to make himself count on the counter, but that's such a slim part of his game when it comes to goals and assists compared to that sort of traditional number 9 in the box that I think we've seen from him and the goals that we've seen from him late on. So in a sense, I'd say, as negative as this sounds, he probably isn't going to be that effective in any guise under Wagner from the start. Perhaps if another another head coach came in, decided to change the style of play and go for something more attacking, where he could probably be a bit more involved in and around the box, that might suit him from the start. But for me, under Wagner, when they're going to play this fairly defensive system late on in the game, when it opens up, seems to be the only scenario really where he as a player is going to be effective. So yeah, it's quite a tricky one for Wagner to work him into his system. I don't think he has the same effectiveness as maybe Josh Sargent in that role. He probably doesn't have the same pressing capabilities that the American has. So I think it is going to be difficult for him to do that. Of course, any player will back himself to do that. But I keep thinking Eder's not really doing himself any favours, is he? Every time he starts, he struggles to make an impact. Every time he comes off the bench, he seems to be the hero. So if you're Wagner, we've called on him a few times, or there seems to be these opinions, and it's been my opinion at times, to be honest, that Wagner needs to reward him with a start. But now, if he puts him on the bench, I absolutely understand that, and you can't really contest that, because so far that's been where he's been most effective from.
Yeah, lots of comments and sort of, I suppose, opinions on David Wagner. Harvey saying Wagner out since Leeds and counting. Robert Fenn, do I think Wagner's the right man? No. Whoever can get 7 points for the next 3 games, I'm willing to give him more time to change my mind. Ian Gabelli, of course, counteracts that with he's won 3 of the last 4, which is, of course, a fair assessment. Harvey, again, here, we threw away the Leeds game, we threw away the Watford game. Still believes Liam Gibbs is good. Looks like a nice guy, not the person who's going to transform this team. On the theme of Liam Gibbs, I'm actually going to play a little clip from yesterday's press conference, Sam, and get your take on it, because I thought David Wagner was quite open about kind of the sort of impact that he feels Liam Gibbs has had in recent games, which I suppose has maybe caught the eye on social media.
Yeah, but I love Gibbsy. He can play both positions. He is, I think, one of the most football intelligence players in our squad. You can put him more or less in every position. He tactically more or less understands and knows exactly what to do. He asks the right questions, and obviously he has a super speed and can run a lot as well. For him, it's a little bit the same like it was for Nacho, to take care of the ball if you play a little bit in a deeper role centrally on the pitch. If you play higher, it's about numbers, creating opportunities, scoring goals, giving assists, and this is the area where he has to and will improve. I think last season, end of the season, where we had this problems injury-wise in the midfield, he played a lot of minutes and has shown that he can play his part. Now maybe he had a few less starts than he had at the end of the last season, but he is very reliable, and he will start further games for us in the next games, in the next weeks, in this busy period for sure, because he's a very reliable player. And as I said, I really like him. He's still young and academy product, so there is space for improvement, and he knows this. But I have every trust and belief in him.
Yeah, of course, Liam Gibbs was part of that interesting team lineup that David Wagner announced last weekend. Kenny McLean at centre half. Of course, Dimi Nulis, good positive update on him after what he sort of went off with the suspected injury. He's available for tomorrow's game against Preston. First and foremost, Sam, thoughts on the comments there from David Wagner around Liam Gibbs and I suppose the impact that he can have moving forwards?
Yeah, I thought they were very interesting, and I didn't think they were comments that probably the majority of the fan base would enjoy. I know he's come in for a lot of criticism this season, and I don't personally see the technical ability in him to be a key player at championship level, but I do see some of what Wagner sees in him. I think he is obviously a hard worker. He's got that energy, and he has got a little bit of pace behind him, maybe not sort of Przemysław Poeta levels, but you can see why he's a Wagner player. Now we all know the style of play that he likes, the sort of ideals that he has, and his football philosophy. I think we can all understand why Liam Gibbs is a David Wagner type player. I'm not sure it will sit especially well that he is expected to start quite regularly throughout this sort of festive period, as Wagner seemed to suggest. But in fairness, I thought that Bristol performance was actually his best since he scored the opener against Blackburn in April. When you actually look back on the sort of key moments, I know Hernandez hitting the post was set up by Liam Gibbs. That header Ashley Barnes had in the second half was a nice Gibbs cross that sort of Barnes and Duffy mixed up between them. So he did create chances that way. And in a team that was performing quite well, he seemed to thrive a little bit. He ran the channels very well, put a couple of decent crosses in. And I think when he's playing on instinct, he actually plays quite well. You look back at that goal against Blackburn, and it was just him sprinting from the halfway line and smashing it with his left foot from the edge of the box. I think maybe when he thinks about it too much and he's got too much time around the area, he doesn't really seem to thrive. I think that's where he's better deeper. I think when he has time to think sort of on the ball as that deep line midfielder that Marcelino Nunez played against Bristol, he's able to find those good passes, and his technical ability is good enough to be that sort of player to spray the passes around. And defensively, he's got, I'd say, sort of 6 out of 10 capability. So I think he's got the attributes to play various roles at this level, just not really to the level that he's going to be starting on a regular basis. As I said, I can see him as a Wagner player, and I think he suits that system. He did fairly well feeding on scraps at times in the first half against Bristol and even in the second. But do I see him as a long-term solution to any sort of problem? Not really. I think he's the sort of player that when Napa conducts this sort of rebuild that we expect to see, the lowering of the age profile of the squad, he's probably one that's going to get kept in and around it as a sort of backup player. And I think in the Championship, he's certainly good enough to be on your bench, but he's probably not somebody that you look at as somebody who's going to get a Premier League move at any point. Even when players haven't been getting a lot of games, you can see the sort of progression that they can make. You look at Andrew Omobamidele, easy for me to say, and even after sort of 5-6 games, you felt like he was somebody who could go on and take off and get a move to the Premier League, as he subsequently did. I think watching Gibbs, he just feels like somebody who maybe has found his level in the Championship and is likely to stay at that level throughout his career. And there's nothing wrong with that. They bought him for hundreds of thousands from Ipswich, so it's not necessarily a bad buy. But I'm not sure it's a good sign for the quality of this squad that Wagner feels he's going to play a key part or a big role in this sort of festive period. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, which sort of players are going to miss out, because actually when I was doing tactics board and I was thinking of my predicted 11, I realised if Kenny McLean is going to come out of centre-back, which I think we expect him to do, given Preston have got Will Keane and a couple of other fairly physical strikers that they can put in that team, it feels likely that McLean comes out of the defence, in which case he'll certainly be in midfield, and then either Marcelino Nunez or Liam Gibbs has to miss out. And I actually thought both of those had very good games against Bristol. I think Paddy asked Wagner about Nunez at Bristol, and he also felt that he played very well. So it'll be interesting to see how he sort of balances that and who misses out. You've got to think we've got Josh Sargent coming back in a couple of weeks as well. So the squad depth is starting to improve, and I think Liam Gibbs might be a little bit of a victim of that. But I think some of the criticism of him has been very slightly harsh, but I don't agree with Wagner really in terms of how highly he rates him, to be honest.
Yeah, he spoke kind of about the direct nature of Preston, and it's a very different style to what Norwich have faced in recent weeks. Preston on kind of a real downward trajectory at the moment. They're 24th in the form table in the last 10 games. They're really struggling, 3 straight defeats, and it feels like they're in a bit of a difficult patch. I think that Emil Rees has been injured for quite a sustained period. He's kind of a massive goal threat for them. Osmajic, who's a striker they brought in the summer, he's out injured as well for Saturday. So I think they've got Ched Evans and Will Keane leading the line. So they're going to be a real threat. What have you made of Preston, I suppose, one all season, but more in recent weeks, Sam? And what kind of test do you think they're going to pose tomorrow?
Yeah, I think start of the season, they had a feeling of that Championship team that you think might drop out of it. You look at Reading last season when they were sort of in and around it, and probably to an extent Norwich in both of those seasons. And they felt like a team that was maybe riding the wave of momentum a little bit. I think Ryan Lowe is a good manager, and he's coming under a lot of pressure at the moment. I think it might not be the smartest move were they to let him go, but you can understand why they're disappointed. I remember the way that people were speaking about Preston at the start of the season. I remember hearing an interview with the goalkeeper where they were really speaking about ambitions and making the most. And they did say, I think he did say they would snap your hand off for the playoffs at the time. But now it feels almost like they're trying to guard against slipping even lower in the league table. You obviously spoke to somebody who covers Preston on Terrace Talk. I'd recommend giving that a watch, but it was a pretty grim assessment of where they are. I think there was even mention of relegation without you even prompting it. So there clearly is some pessimism about the way that they're heading. It almost feels like Norwich are now in the position that teams that faced them a couple of weeks ago were in. They're now against a team that's losing momentum, that probably has fans against them. Actually, I've just put some quotes on Pinkham.com where he's basically asked the fans to get back on side because they were booing them at the end of that QPR loss last weekend. So it really does feel like that club isn't heading in the right direction. They're desperately in need of something to turn it around. And although they might also be looking at this as Norwich, who, yes, they've won 3 out of 4, but certainly have frailties and cracks that they can probably exploit, Norwich have to be looking at this as an opportunity to go and extend their run. And this, I think, has been the most open Wagner has been about this being an opportunity to go and win a game. You look back a few weeks ago, he was talking about QPR, who, this was before they got their wins under Martí Cifuentes. I think they'd only had like a 0-0 draw under him and were still in the relegation zone, and Wagner was talking about them as a tough side and it would be a tough test. Now we're in a position, and I think this tells you about how much more positive Wagner is feeling, at least, about the club, that he's now talking about Preston as a real opportunity to go and extend that run and to get a bit of momentum behind them. I would agree with him on that one, especially if you're going to have these promotion aims that maybe people don't necessarily agree with. But the club at no point so far have come out and said that isn't the aim anymore. So we can assume they're still gunning for the playoffs. And if you are up against a team that's lost 3 in a row, is in a real toxic situation, I think you have to be going into that thinking at home that it's a real opportunity.
Yeah, we're going to dip into a few of the comments and questions before we sort of turn the attention to the game. Jeffman asking there about whether, with Wang being injured, could we see an under-21 like Aboa being on the bench? I suppose, given that he wasn't on the bench last weekend, where there was an opportunity, maybe, would you agree, Sam, that it's probably unlikely to see him there tomorrow?
Yeah, I think, especially given Sargent is going to be back fairly soon. They've only got to deal with, 3 or 4, maybe 5 games before. Well, that feels like quite a lot, given he's only back in a couple of weeks. But I think they will probably muddle through with just Eder and Barnes. He's obviously got players that, we spoke about Liam Gibbs. Marcelino Nunez has played in that sort of number 10 role. I think he'd probably, if asked, he would stick Sainz and maybe even Poeta in that mix. So they've probably got enough first team players. We also know about Wagner's preference for, shall we say, experience. So I would be surprised if Abo gets the call up there. He's not one that we've really seen in the mix. You'd expect the bench is going to get filled with the likes of Kellen Fisher and Jayden Warner before he probably gets a chance. But I have seen him play a couple of times for the under-23s this season. Or under-21, sorry. He looks really, really exciting and a very good player. Hopefully it's one where they get the balance right, because with some of them, they've waited too long to either get them their loan or get them in the first team mix. Some of them, they've done it way too quickly and they look a little bit out of their depth. But hopefully they're biding their time and he can get a fairly decent loan move either in January or the summer, because I think his stats so far this season and the way that he's performing suggests that he probably should be able to. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on in the mid to long term. But just with how they've set up this season, I'd be surprised if he gets called into the sort of first team mix in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think he was one of a few that were released in that training video that the club released this morning. I think it's him, Manning, Lima. They're all kind of involved in the first team group, but probably players more that are being watched, I suppose, for sort of potential opportunity to break in further down the line. Jeffman with another question, sort of moving a little bit more forward into next week. Could we see a lot of rotation for the Sheffield Wednesday game, so everyone's 100% for the derby? Obviously, that's a little bit forward looking in the future, Sam, but could you see that being a tactical approach that David Wagner adopts?
I don't think so. I think as much as Norwich fans and people outside the club will talk about the derby as such a massive occasion, obviously, we have been speaking about it already. And given this is my first one actually living in the city, I can't believe how much of a topic it is on people's lips and how important or how I knew how important it was, but how far ahead people are looking at it and really thinking about it. But Wagner isn't really in that camp, is he? I'm sure he understands the importance of a derby. Of course, he will have been a football fan and he's been a player in derbies. He's been a manager in derbies before, but he's not really employed to care more about Ipswich than any other games. I'm sure he'll be looking at it as a very difficult one. But I suppose if you actually looked at it tactically, based on the quality of the teams, you'd say with how well Ipswich are playing, as sad as it is to say, probably put most of your eggs in the Sheffield Wednesday basket and make sure you can win that one at home. Obviously, I hope that isn't the situation, and I know Norwich fans will be in that camp as well, of really, really being desperate to get a result out of the Ipswich game. But yeah, I don't think Wagner will look at it that way. I think he'll just manage it as he would any other Wednesday, Saturday combination, to be honest.
Yeah, a couple of questions around January already. Joe asking, could you see any business being done in the transfer market? And Harvey saying, thanks for the pod. What do you think we need in January? Of course, Paddy did ask David Wagner yesterday around January in the meeting that he would have had with Ben Napper this week. And he was kind of very open that the fact that Ben Napper has lots of exciting ideas that he can get on board with and he agrees with. And it kind of feels like, based off the kind of comments that Napper said at the AGM, it's going to be younger players with sort of more potential for the future. Probably kind of, well, me and Paddy were actually talking about this yesterday in the office, kind of more of the ilk of players that are kind of maybe like a Morgan Whittaker maybe at Plymouth, that kind of profile of player where they're young, they can develop and hopefully, obviously, you know, for Norwich's sake, they can sell on for big money in the future, or if they get into the Premier League, of course, make an impact. Based on those two questions, Sam, what do Norwich need in the window and what sort of business can you see them doing, I suppose?
Yeah, I think, there will obviously be business just from how they've been talking. I think Mark Attanasio also spoke about the need for young players. That wasn't really a surprise given how we've heard Napper talk, and you underlined it there. Really, I'd agree with what you said and say that probably youth is what they need, and just a feeling of freshness at the club more than really in any specific position. I suppose you'd look at the defensive midfield hole, but Wagner has been quite consistent about the fact that he doesn't really see the need for one of those in his system. And obviously with Kenny McLean and Gabriel Sara, he'd suggest if they're looking to improve the first team, that's going to be a difficult thing to do, to improve on either of those with the budget that they're going to have available. But, you know, like you said, it might be about just freshening that squad up, and it probably depends how they see it. If they see it as going all out for promotion this season, then you'd think the business will be quite different to if they're trying to build for the future. But I get the sense Napper is trying to overhaul the squad over a more general, a longer term period. And I think even though you probably won't see it admitted by the club, there will be an admittance internally and a knowledge that promotion is fairly unlikely this season. And it might be, a couple of those young players who aren't quite ready to start yet, but can bed in with the group, can get a few games at Championship level, can progress at the club, and then go and maybe play a starring role in the seasons to come. Because unfortunately, Norwich can't afford and probably can't attract the top level young players that can go and start in the Championship right now and make an impact. So I am looking forward to it. It should be a more exciting January window than what we normally see at Norwich City and what they've experienced in the last few years. So yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. And I would say there's a very, very high chance some business gets done. Napper sees it as sort of a chance to get his rebuild going rather than just your standard January to top up the squad for the rest of the season. So that will be really interesting to look out for and to see how Norwich get on. But yeah, I think it's probably more about the profile of players than actual positions or weaknesses in the squad they need to address.
Yeah, going back to the game, how do you see the mood being like tomorrow at Carrow Road? Of course, it's a week on from the comments that Delia made. I know there was obviously a game at Bristol between that, but there was only just over 1,000 Norwich fans there. It's the first opportunity that 27,000 Norwich fans are going to see their team since those comments. How do you think Carrow's going to react? It's been quite quiet, I suppose, in recent weeks. That's been fairly understandable. The football's been pretty poor, and there's nothing really to get behind. So, how do you see the Norwich fans reacting tomorrow?
Yeah, I think church mice was the phrase that Delia used to describe the atmosphere, wasn't it? I think it probably works in her favour that there's been a win and 9 days between those comments and this game, as much as I'm sure there are fans out there who would like to think the reception and the atmosphere is going to be as angry as maybe it would have been had that game been happening a couple of days after those comments. I really don't think it will be, to be honest. I think there might be, if things start to go wrong, there will almost certainly be some dissenting voices. But from what we hear about the away end at Bristol, those that were trying to come up with those chants, even in that game, were sort of drowned out a little bit and struggled to get that going. I suppose it depends on sort of where in the ground that is and who's trying to get that started. You'd suggest there's probably more of a base in the sort of Snake Pit and Barclay that might be more keen to get that criticism going than the away end, which tends to be a blend of sort of different ideals at times and different sorts of supporters. So I'm interested to see how it goes, but Wagner has tried to sort of galvanise the fans and get them on side for the first time in a while. I think he understood he didn't have a lot of credit with them, but he clearly feels now after 3 wins from 4, he can sort of call on them to try and produce an atmosphere against Preston. And although I think that is technically it would be the right thing to do to try and produce results for the club, I think they will have a little bit of difficulty trying to summon that enthusiasm, because there probably still isn't the level of goodwill towards Wagner that there would be at most clubs after that run of results. I think they're still quite bored by his football and they want change at the club. So I think it will take a more sustained period of good results to really get that raucous atmosphere and that optimism and positivity back at Carrow Road, like you might have had, a few years ago. But it will be better than I think it was, say, against QPR or against Blackburn, where there was just ambivalence and silence and not a lot of care, to be honest, towards how the team was doing. So, I think there'll be a little bit of support, probably somewhere in the middle of where it might have been after those Delia comments, and where it would be had this form taken place at a club that was a little bit happier. But I'm not 100% that Wagner can count on the sort of big atmosphere he's hoping for, because as I said, still not loads of goodwill towards him and some of the decisions that have been made or sort of over the last few months.
Yeah, first game of a big week for Norwich City. Preston have a pretty good record at Carrow Road, actually. I think Norwich have only beaten them once in the last 7 meetings. There, though, in very poor form and really struggling. Norwich off the back of 3 wins in the last 4. How do you see this one going, Sam? Of course, a very different style of team to maybe what Norwich have faced in different, in previous times. They've often struggled, I feel, against sides that are quite physical. It's something that maybe Norwich aren't the best equipped to deal with. So, how are you feeling ahead of this one?
I think momentum-wise, they're in quite a good position, and I always speak about how important momentum is in the Championship. But I also agree with you that they have struggled against these sorts of physical types. That said, it's sort of the game that Wagner will thrive on. You look at the likes of Shane Duffy, Danny Bart, the players that Norwich have, and it's probably going to be more of a kick it, head it, clear it situation against this Preston team, and that does suit them quite well. It's about whether they can use the counter-attacks more effectively than they have at times. You look at that QPR game, and although they were sat in and QPR struggled to break them down, Norwich was so poor on the counter-attack. They produced one good one, scored from it, and got lucky to get the 3 points. So if they can improve on that, then there's probably somewhere for them to exploit Preston. I feel a bit like I was speaking about that atmosphere. I feel somewhere in the middle of things have improved and things are still bad. So I think Norwich might scrape it, actually. I think I'm somewhere between 1-0 and 2-0. I'll say 2-1 to Norwich, because I think they will find a way to get a result, just because I speak so much about how important momentum is in the Championship, and the confidence in the Preston team will be so low at the moment in the Norwich team, because they actually seem to be fairly good at that old phrase, ignoring the noise. So I think probably internally they're feeling quite confident and quite positive at the moment. So I think they might go and actually get a result. And with Sheffield Wednesday coming up, there might be a decent amount of momentum going into that East Anglian derby on December the 16th. But that's as much positivity as you're going to get from me. What do you reckon, Adam?
Yeah, so having spoken to a Preston journalist who covers the club, he was kind of speaking about the Preston's almost inability to score goals and the fact they're really struggling and leaking quite a lot of goals at the same time. I think this is the sort of game that if Norwich can get an early goal, then I'd back them to go on and get the victory. And I feel like they might get a clean sheet tomorrow. So I'm going to go with a 2-0 Norwich win, which would be a real boost going into then another 2 big games coming up that week. Joe feeling very confident. He's going with a a 3-0 Norwich City win. There's another comment down here from Matt Shaw, but how about the crowd being supportive and encouraging and to help the team in building confidence and better performances, which I feel like, if you get that from the Norwich fans, of course they're going to back, if they see a positive performance on the pitch, then hopefully that can breed confidence. It is a big week for Norwich. They're still only 4 points outside the playoffs somehow or other, which maybe it feels in the long term that's a little bit of a long way away, but you never know. We've seen it before where teams maybe have a really good second half of the season, and maybe it can be the building blocks for what could be a positive second half of the campaign for the Canaries, particularly given kind of the comments around the January window and maybe the freshness that might inject into a team that's maybe struggled at different points. And with that, I think that's probably it for this preview show. Lots of great content across our channels at the moment. You can go and hear David Wagner's thoughts ahead of this one. Of course, the full press conference is available on the Pink and YouTube channel at the moment. Sam's Tactics Board, where you can see what he's predicted for a starting 11. David Wagner, I got the feeling yesterday, was probably kind of hinting that maybe he is going to make some changes to deal with that physicality. So you can hear what Sam has to think on that one. Terrace Talker just mentioned that I spoke to a person who covers Preston, kind of got all the lowdown on what's going wrong at Deepdale at the moment. So if you want to kind of hear all what Preston are dealing with at the moment, then that's probably the place to go. Lots of great content, of course, on the Pink and Plus app as well. You've got Chris Sutton's column, Ewan Roberts' column, Chris Gorham's column, Will Jennings' column. There's lots of great columns on there, and you can actually take out our offer at the moment, which is 3 months for only £3, which is a really good deal. Come and try it out for a fairly, I suppose, extensive period there for relatively low cost. It might be something you want to consider to get a Norwich City fan for Christmas. We also have an annual subscription for £24, so that's well worth heading over and checking out if you're not already a subscriber. With that, we'll see you at Carrow Road tomorrow. Fingers crossed Norwich City can continue this relatively good run that they're having at the moment, and it could be another 3 points ahead of what is a really, really big week for the club.